No, I've never had to do a scene before. But it was weird because we've never fought.
Probably relieved when they find out they're get.
Another time, she's done things that will never be done again, and they don't make them like Polly anymore. I don't know what else to say, how to explain it. You'd have to meet her, you'd have to know her.
Axl Rose's girlfriend, the world's supermodel. But no one could have guessed the ending of this story. We open with that line because Stephanie Seymour's life reads like the headline it promises. One moment at the top of the runway. Adored by rock stars, and behind the scenes, storms raging. You should be asking, wait, what happened? Perfect. I want you curious. Now let's rewind and examine everything in fine detail. Stephanie Michelle Seymour was born on July 23, 1968, in San Diego, California, and raised in Florida. Even as a teenager, her height and striking facial structure made her stand out. She entered modeling relatively early and quickly caught the eye of photographers and agencies. That early attention became the engine of a career, and it also introduced the first thorns in her life. For young Stephanie, fashion was less a dream than an escape. She didn't quite fit into a normal life. There was something restless and atypical about her. The fashion scene of the 1980s craved strong, theatrical faces, and Stephanie fit right into that demand. Captivating, bold, a little rebellious. Her first professional shoots and magazine appearances pushed her onto major agency roles. Photographers noted she brought an authentic intensity to frames that few others could match. What were the concrete first steps? Two factors propelled her early rise: her physical presence, tall, statuesque, angular, and the attitude she brought to sets and runways. She wasn't just pretty, she had character. She injected a narrative into photos. The industry loved that. Early shoots in magazines signaled to designers that Stephanie could sell not just clothes but a mood and an image. Her breakthrough came through powerful editorials in titles like Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. Photographers wanted her because her images sold viewers sensed that there was a story behind the face. At the same time, designers and brands began to cast her. Versace, high-end campaigns, and eventually she became one of the faces associated with Victoria's Secret. Runways, catalogs, and high-budget ad campaigns transformed her into a global icon, laying the foundation for the blinding brightness that would follow. But remember, every shine has a shadow. A key detail of Stephanie's early years is that while she was building a career, she was also drawn into the turbulent private life of fashion and rock. Relationships that would be glamorous on the surface but complicated underneath. This is a flag I'll wave now. We'll return to it later. Axl Rose, music videos, engagements. And legal disputes are all part of the story. Quick question for you. When does a model's glittering career become an out-of-control life? Stephanie's story shows this step by step. Runway success, fame high speed. Parties, romantic storms, tiny cracks becoming big ones. Spill the tea? Yes, later. For now, take note of the pattern. To summarize this chapter, Stephanie Seymour's childhood and first steps were defined by her physical presence. Discovery by fashion elites, early magazine and runway success, and her entrance into the world of Victoria's Secret and high fashion. Crucially, her story was never just about beauty. It was about attitude, relationships, and a presence that seduced the industry and seeded later complexity. In Chapter 2, we'll dive fully into the career explosion, the Versace collaborations, the iconic Vogue covers, key runway moments with Victoria's Secret, and how the fashion world cemented her supermodel status. We'll also explore the early pressure points, how fame and a jet-set lifestyle began to create strain. Ready? Because things accelerate from here. Stephanie Seymour's rise to the supermodel throne in the 1990s was nothing short of a Hollywood movie. Imagine this. One day she's just a regular California girl walking on the beach. The next she's striding down the runway for Versace, surrounded by the most famous designers in the world. Talk about that escalated quickly. Her rise in fashion wasn't slow or calculated. On the contrary, it felt as if the runway had been waiting for her. After signing with elite model management, she became a near-overnight sensation. By 1988, she was already gracing the covers of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Cosmopolitan. But the real explosion came in the early 90s, during the golden era of the supermodel. At the time, Cindy, Naomi, Claudia, Christy, and Linda were leading the Big Six, and Stephanie quickly became part of that elite group. Picture it. Fashion weeks bouncing between Milan, Paris, and New York, cameras flashing everywhere, paparazzi camping outside shows, and the media talking only about these 6 women. Stephanie stood out not just for her beauty, but for her charisma and edge that felt both glamorous and rebellious. While many models walked the runway with icy detachment, Stephanie's eyes carried a secret, a subtle spark that made people think. There's something different about her. One of the biggest boosts to her career came from her work with Victoria's Secret. In the early 90s, she became the face of the brand, back when it was not yet the mainstream giant it is today. She was among the first to popularize the concept of angels and to transform lingerie, fashion shows into pop culture phenomena. With her red lipstick and vintage pin-up aura, she created a look that was both sexy and sophisticated. If anything, she embodied the definition of the it girl of her era, then. Into her life walked one of rock's most chaotic figures, Axl Rose. Her relationship with the Guns N' Roses frontman was described by the press as fire and gunpowder. Both at the top of their fields, both notorious for their scandals, paparazzi couldn't have asked for a better story. In 1991, Stephanie appeared in the Guns N' Roses video for Don't Cry. Remember those dramatic stares she gave the camera? That wasn't acting. It was a reflection of their real-life relationship. Just a year later, in 1992, she starred in one of the most iconic music videos in rock history, November Rain. That wedding dress scene remains one of the internet's most enduring images. Millions have rewatched it over the decades, cementing Stephanie's place not only in fashion but also in music history. But here's where things start to spill the tea. As passionate as her relationship with Axl was, it was equally toxic. The couple constantly fought, reconciled, broke up, and reunited. The contrast between her glittering runway persona and the chaos of her private life became tabloid gold. During this time, Stephanie also walked for the likes of Versace, Chanel, Dior, and Yves Saint Laurent. She was a favorite of Anna Wintour, landing on multiple Vogue covers. Yet at the same time, paparazzi were reporting every messy detail of her personal life. Headlines like "Stephanie leaves Axl," "Axl writes song for Stephanie," or "Stephanie finds new love" filled the gossip pages almost weekly. Can you imagine living under that kind of pressure? One day you're receiving applause at a Dior show in Paris. The next, your argument in Los Angeles is plastered on every tabloid cover. It was as if her life was unfolding at 2 different speeds, in 2 different universes. By the mid-90s, Stephanie's name was tied not only to fashion but also to scandal. At the very peak of her career, whispers of substance abuse, volatile relationships, and paparazzi escapes began to swirl around her. And here's the core of it all. Stephanie Seymour may have been one of the most beautiful faces of the 90s. But behind that beauty lay a fragile, chaotic, and explosive world. And that world was about to get even darker in the years to come. So what happened after those dazzling days of runways and music videos? How did her career evolve? How did her relationships unfold? And when did the family tragedies begin? That's where the story opens its most dramatic chapter. Looking at Stephanie Seymour's life in the mid-90s felt like staring at a canvas, painted with both shimmering gold and the darkest black. On one side, she was one of the most talked-about supermodels in the world: fame, fortune, red carpets, the applause of the runway. On the other, there were chaotic relationships, relentless paparazzi, scandals, and whispers of addiction. That contrast is what turned her story from a simple model's biography into something closer to the dramatic script of a novel or a film. Her relationship with Axl Rose was still front and center, while the November Rain wedding scene remained etched into millions of memories. Behind the cameras, the reality was far less romantic. Heated fights, harsh words, and never-ending drama defined their life together. Stephanie might have looked like a goddess on the runway, but behind the curtains, she was often said to collapse into tears, leaning on friends for comfort. The media reported on their private life as if it were a soap opera unfolding week by week. One headline would read, "Stephanie and Axl back together," only to be followed days later by, "Stephanie walks out." The paparazzi's constant presence made life unbearable. Whether in Paris, Milan, or New York, the moment she stepped out of a hotel, a wall of flashing cameras surrounded her. Her private life became a public performance. Friends later revealed that Stephanie sometimes feared leaving her house, because every move, every glance, every slip could become front-page news. Under such pressure, even breathing freely seemed impossible. At the same time, she was colliding with the other ruthless side of the fashion industry, cutthroat competition. The mid-90s were the peak of the supermodel era, but they were also years when new faces were pushed into the spotlight at breakneck speed. Every brand was searching for the new Cindy, the new Naomi. Stephanie continued to grace the covers of Vogue and walk in Versace shows. But the rise of younger models placed a heavy, invisible weight on her shoulders. Either she would defend her place at the top, or she would be pushed aside. And this is when her turbulent personal life began to cast real shadows on her career. Rumors spread quickly: alcohol, drugs, late-night partying. Tabloids regularly published stories of Stephanie leaving clubs at dawn, disheveled and exhausted. Some friends said she seemed lost, as though she was slowly losing control. A fellow model once recalled in an interview, "Stephanie radiated light on stage, but backstage it was like she was running from her own shadow." That quote captured her state of mind perfectly. The relationship with Axl Rose only added fuel to the fire. Their fights reportedly escalated to the point of physical altercations. Legal battles followed, with lawyers stepping in and court filings making headlines. The once adored rock star supermodel couple had become tabloid fodder for all the wrong reasons. What began as a fairy tale romance now looked far more like a tragedy. Through it all, Stephanie tried to hold on to her career. She kept walking for Versace, Chanel, Dior, and she remained one of Victoria's Secret's most recognizable faces. That partnership alone gave her visibility that many others envied. But those who looked closely noticed a change. She was still stunning on the runway, still capable of commanding a room. But there was a fragility in her eyes, a subtle weariness. Photographers whispered about it. She used to stare down the lens like a challenge. Now there's a softness, a vulnerability. By the second half of the 1990s, things grew even messier. Stephanie's name was increasingly linked not only with the glamour of fashion, but also with scandals, substance rumors, and even legal troubles. On one page of the magazine, she was the face of Dior. On another, a grainy paparazzi shot captured her leaving a police station. This duality seriously hurt her public image. And yet, paradoxically, it kept people fascinated. Stephanie Seymour was still one of the most talked about figures in pop culture, not in spite of the chaos, but because of it. She was both mesmerizing and tragic. The kind of character people couldn't stop watching. The real question at that point was, could Stephanie pull herself out of this storm? Or would the blinding lights of fame continue dragging her deeper into darkness? Her story was no longer just about modeling. It was about love, addiction, loss of control, and survival. And the most dramatic chapters were still ahead. By the late 1990s, Stephanie Seymour's life looked less like the fairy tale of a supermodel and more like a turbulent novel. On the runway, she was still a star, but behind the glamour, storms in her personal life never seemed to leave the tabloids. Her chaotic romance with Axl Rose had already ended, but the aftermath left scars both emotional and legal. Their battles spilled into court, with accusations of violence and endless blame games, making them one of the most talked about couples of the decade. Walking away from Axl didn't just mean leaving a lover behind. It also meant leaving behind a part of her youth. The turning point came when she met billionaire art collector Peter Brandt. Brandt was a powerful figure in both business and art circles. Their relationship quickly turned into marriage in 1995. And Stephanie transitioned from supermodel to high society wife. On the surface, this seemed like the stability and security she had been missing. But behind the curtains, her marriage to Brandt carried just as much turbulence as her past. Their union was marked by luxury estates, private jets, and art auctions, but also by jealousy. heated arguments, and deep crises. By 2009, the couple was headed for divorce, sparking one of New York's most high-profile cases. Media outlets speculated endlessly about how their billion-dollar assets would be divided, while paparazzi camped outside courtrooms. Then, in a surprising twist, Stephanie and Brant reconciled in 2010. Their reconciliation mirrored the unpredictable, back-and-forth rhythm of her life. Her children, however, became her greatest pride and her greatest challenge. Stephanie and Brant had 3 children together, Peter II, Harry, and Lily. While she embraced motherhood, her struggles with addiction never truly went away. By the early 2000s, rumors about alcohol and drug use grew more concrete. She was even arrested once for driving under the influence. Her mugshot splashed across newspapers worldwide. The once glamorous face of the fashion world was now attached to police records and scandal headlines. But the most devastating blow came years later with the tragedy of her son Harry Brant. Much like his mother, Harry entered the fashion scene, quickly becoming a beloved figure in high society. Charismatic, stylish, and hailed as a star in the making, Harry seemed destined for greatness. Yet he too battled the same demon struggles with addiction. In 2021, at just 24 years old, Harry died from an accidental overdose. Harry's death shattered Stephanie Seymour. She withdrew from the public eye, disappearing from the runways, skipping interviews, and hiding from the cameras. Friends close to her said she was irreparably changed. Although she tried to rebuild, even launching her own lingerie line in 2023, nothing could fill the void Harry left behind. What makes Stephanie Seymour's story remarkable is that it isn't just a tale of beauty, fame, and wealth. She was one of the most iconic supermodels of the 1990s, a face that defined an era. But beneath the spotlight, she carried fragility, chaos, and an inner world on the brink of collapse. Her romantic turmoil, battles with addiction, relentless tabloid pressure, and the unbearable grief of losing her child turned her life into a tragedy far deeper than any fashion headline. When people think of Stephanie Seymour today, they still remember the unforgettable runways of the 90s, or her iconic bridal scene in Guns N' Roses' November Rain. But those who know her story understand something more. That behind the glamour was a woman enduring a relentless struggle. A reminder that fame and beauty are never shields against pain. And perhaps that is Stephanie Seymour's lasting legacy, not just as a muse of fashion history, but as a symbol of the true cost of fame. Because sometimes, even when a story begins in the brightest spotlight, it can end in the darkest shadow. In the early 1990s, Stephanie Seymour was not just another model. She was a phenomenon, a woman whose name was etched in golden letters in fashion history. On the runway, she enchanted crowds. On the covers of Vogue and Elle, she radiated timeless beauty. She was one of Victoria's Secret's brightest stars. But the defining element of this era of her life wasn't only fashion, it was her turbulent relationship with one of the most famous rock stars of the time, Axl Rose. When they first met at a party, Axl was already one of the most talked about men in the world. Guns N' Roses had become the anthem of a generation with hits like Sweet Child O' Mine and Paradise City. Stephanie, meanwhile, was dazzling on the catwalks of Versace and gracing the covers of the most prestigious magazines. Their meeting was like a collision of two cultural supernovas, rock and fashion fused together. The media instantly labeled them the beautiful model and the bad boy. Their relationship quickly became the stuff of tabloids and headlines. Axl's intensity and magnetic charisma, paired with Stephanie's elegance and beauty, made them one of the most striking couples in Hollywood. To the outside world, they looked like a dream pairing. But behind the closed doors, storms were brewing. Their love was passionate, yes, but it was also marked by fights, jealousy, and tears. In 1992, Stephanie Seymour immortalized her image in one of Guns N' Roses' most iconic music videos, November Rain, wearing a stunning white wedding gown. She stood at the altar beside Axl in a cinematic moment that blended rock music and high fashion like never before. That wedding scene burned itself into pop culture memory. Even today, millions remember that image as one of the defining snapshots of the 90s. Yet, when the cameras stopped rolling, the picture-perfect fantasy crumbled. Axl's temper, paired with Stephanie's independent spirit, often led to explosive clashes. Paparazzi frequently caught the couple mid-argument. Rumors swirled about abuse, betrayal, and volatile fights. The press devoured these stories, turning their relationship into a media circus. Fans who once admired their fairy tale romance were shocked by the darker reality that seeped through. Stephanie lived a paradox. She was experiencing both the greatest love affair of her life and the most painful struggles. Axl's jealousy and controlling nature cast long shadows over her brightest professional years. But at the same time, this was the peak of her modeling career. By the mid-90s, Stephanie was one of the select few supermodels chosen to walk the runway for Victoria's Secret. She commanded stages in Paris, Milan, and New York. Modeling for Versace, Valentino, and Christian Dior, she wasn't just a model. She was a fashion icon whose presence defined an era. Still, fame's dazzling lights masked deepening cracks in her personal life. Whispers of drug and alcohol abuse followed her, and the pressures of maintaining her place in the cutthroat world of fashion collided with the chaos of rock star living. The combination was a dangerous cocktail, pulling her deeper into instability. Her relationship with Axl ultimately ended not in reconciliation, but in court. They broke up in a blaze of accusations. Axl accused Stephanie of betrayal, while she described his violent tendencies and emotional turmoil. Their breakup became headline news around the globe. Millions followed their downfall through gossip columns and sensationalist coverage. What had once been the most glamorous romance of the decade ended in bitter recriminations. And yet, that chapter of her life cemented Stephanie Seymour's status not only as a supermodel but as a cultural figure caught in one of the most infamous love stories of the 1990s. Her name was forever tied to passion, scandal, and spectacle. In the triangle of love, fame, and chaos, Stephanie shone as brightly as any star of her generation, but within, she was beginning to fracture. What the world saw was a goddess of beauty, a muse of fashion, and the unforgettable bride of November Rain. What Stephanie herself lived was far darker, a young woman slowly being consumed by her choices, her demons, and the merciless spotlight. As this chapter closed, one thing was clear: Stephanie Seymour was standing at the very summit of her career. But she was also standing at the edge of a personal abyss. And in the pages ahead, her story would only grow more tragic, more human, and more unpredictable. By the late 1990s, Stephanie Seymour was still one of the most recognizable faces in the fashion world. But behind the glamorous covers and runway lights, her life was growing more complicated and turbulent. Her scandalous romance with Axl Rose had ended, and the media slowly moved on from seeing her as the rock star's fiancée. Yet this did not mean the chaos in Stephanie's private life had ended. On the contrary, the storm was only just beginning. After breaking up with Axl, Stephanie began a relationship with billionaire businessman Peter Brandt. Brandt was not only a publishing mogul, but also an influential art collector, deeply connected to the world of high society. The two married in 1995, and the union opened the doors to a new kind of life for Stephanie, one of wealth, privilege, and aristocratic glamour. But at the same time, she was still fighting the same demons: addiction and emotional instability. At first, their marriage seemed like a fairy tale of the elite. Parties at Brandt's lavish estates combined with Stephanie's Vogue covers painted the image of a picture-perfect life. But beneath the surface, cracks were everywhere. Stephanie's struggles with drugs and alcohol became more visible, and her erratic behavior put a strain on the marriage. Paparazzi often caught her looking drained, disheveled, or unsteady, fueling endless speculation about her private battles. By the early 2000s, Stephanie's career was no longer at its peak. She was still recognized as a supermodel, but the industry spotlight had shifted to a new generation. Gisele Bündchen, Adriana Lima, and Heidi Klum were now dominating the covers and runways. The age of the original supermodel was fading, and Stephanie found herself caught between fading stardom and personal turmoil. Her marriage to Brandt reflected that turbulence. The couple had 3 children together, but the relationship was constantly marked by conflict. In 2009, when they filed for divorce, the headlines once again turned the spotlight on Stephanie. The accusations exchanged in court shocked even the most seasoned tabloid readers. Brent accused her of being a drug addict, unstable in front of the children, and prone to violent outbursts. Stephanie, in turn, claimed Brent was manipulative, controlling, and emotionally abusive. Paparazzi photos from that time painted a painful contrast. Stephanie, once worshipped on the catwalk, was now captured outside courthouses looking exhausted, broken, and far from her glamorous image. The same press that had crowned her a fashion icon now relished in portraying her as a fallen star. But the greatest tragedy of her life came years later. In January 2021, Stephanie's son Harry Brant died of an accidental drug overdose at just 24 years old. Harry had grown up surrounded by the fashion world, modeling for magazines and establishing himself as a style icon. Bold, experimental, and unapologetically himself, Harry blurred the lines of gender norms and was often described as one of the most promising young voices in fashion. But, like his mother, he struggled with addiction, and in the end, it claimed his life. Harry's death devastated Stephanie in a way nothing else could. All the career highs and lows, the scandals, the courtroom battles, none of them compared to the grief of losing a child. Stephanie disappeared from public life for a time, unable to face the media storm while mourning the unbearable loss. Her story by this point was no longer just about a supermodel's fall from grace. It had become a haunting example of how addiction, fame, and pressure can ripple through a family across generations. The dazzling lights of the fashion world had hidden a reality far darker, that behind the glossy covers was a woman fighting demons that never let her rest. In the years following, Stephanie tried to navigate her pain while still balancing her role as a mother. She occasionally returned for photo shoots and interviews, but the glory of her 1990s reign was long gone. The fashion industry had moved on, leaving Stephanie as one of the last witnesses of an era that defined beauty, fame, and power. The interviews she gave after Harry's death revealed a different Stephanie than the world had once known. No longer the untouchable goddess of the runway, she spoke as a grieving mother, a woman scarred by years of personal battles. Her words unveiled what many had long suspected. Beneath the flawless beauty and fierce persona had always been someone deeply fragile. Searching for peace, Stephanie Seymour's story is one of extremes. The brightest lights of the fashion world and the darkest shadows of personal tragedy. She embodied the glamorous excess of the supermodel era, but she also became a symbol of how destructive that world could be, and perhaps the harshest truth of all is this. Stephanie's life stands as one of the most dramatic reminders of the price of being a supermodel. Her journey exposed the silent screams of addiction, the crushing weight of fame, and the hidden wounds that even beauty and wealth could not heal.